Every morning, the countdown begins for the markets with meticulous research and analysis designed to help you capitalize on the trading day. Beaming live from the CNBC TV 18 Motilal Oswal studio.
Good morning, hello and welcome. You're with us on Bazaar Morning Call. As always, we're coming to you live from the CNBC TV 18 Motilal Oswal studios. I'm Surabhi Upadhyay, with me Prashant and Nigel. And guys, before we talk markets today, there was so much drama. When has an address at the UN General Assembly been as long? And from I was a realtor, I could have renovated this building, to faulty teleprompters, to escalators not working. It was all happening yesterday in New York.
Absolutely. You said it right. What does this remind you of? Escalator suddenly stopping. Huh?
I don't know, Nigel. What have you been doing on escalators?
I was just thinking, when earlier, if you were playing really loud music on a terrace party and if the cops or someone was down, what do? You just leave the last floor lift open, so they have to walk out and they take longer to get you.
There you go. So.
But that's on a lighter note, but yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, I think iconic or I don't know call it, but of course, very, very combative speech in terms of what he said at the UN as well.
And the relevance of the UN, right? He kept challenging the relevance of the UN, saying, you guys have not stopped any wars.
But that's the thing about it. I was thinking about this, right? At the memorial service for Charlie Kirk in the US, President Trump, when he made that speech, always in character.
Yeah.
Doesn't, no matter what the occasion, always kind of sort of hammering on the points that he wants to make.
That's true.
It doesn't matter where he's speaking. So let's just sort of take it from the top in that sense, right? So this is what you got. U.S. equities, which ended lower. S&P was down 0.5%. The Nasdaq ending about 1% lower. So there's a little bit of a pullback, which we've seen last night. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell essentially saying that policymakers face a challenging situation in balancing risks to inflation and the labor market. Remember, he spoke last week extensively, interacted with reporters, etc. There was a 25 basis point cut. There's been a fair bit of debate whether this is a one-off and this is the start of an easing cycle. There was only one voting member, who voted for a 50 basis point cut. That was Stephen Miran, who's Trump's man, who's recently come on the FOMC. But otherwise, and we kind of sort of put out, a lot of people spoke yesterday as well, all of them cautious, and I think this kind of sort of adds to it. Powell warned two-sided risks mean that there is no risk-free path to cutting rates. Basically, you cut rates, economy can overheat, asset prices are at an all-time high across the board, and I think these are concerns which are well understood by the market, but of course, this is coming from the Fed chair. 10-year yield, it's actually gone up a little bit, down about 4 basis points last night, so 4.1. Trump, and at that UN speech, essentially calling for Western allies to limit their intake of Moscow's Russian oil. Oil prices on fears that maybe, there will be a hit to supplies as we go forward, about 2% higher. Brent oil at about $68 a barrel, where we ended. He, of course, also blasted European countries, the United Nations in general, over immigration, climate, and of course, said the climate and the climate change is a hoax, as he said many times before. So a pretty combative speech overall. And I think no softening of stance. If you thought with, 2-3 quarters into this presidency, President Trump, in a gathering like that, perhaps will tone down in terms of his stance, his approach, absolutely none. Now, I just come to India here, right? Yesterday there was the market, which didn't do very much, at least as far as equities are concerned. So it started with last Friday. The pause started last Friday. Monday was a pause again. So cumulatively, we pulled back about 250, 275 points. And yesterday was a pause. So that's the index. But the rupee, it basically blasted higher. Dollar rupee blasted higher. Rupee was lower. So, almost went to about 89 in a single session. So that's the close, 0.5%. I think we'll track this closely today as well. The issues are the same. It was, of course, the trade issues with the U.S., but over the weekend, there was, of course, also the H-1B issue. And it's not very clear that whether this is like just a negotiating tactic or this is the opening salvo and opening up an entire new area, which is services, in an issue which has so far been limited to be dealt with goods. So, and I think there are serious concerns in that sense. So we'll see. You want to take the positive side of it. I mean, you can say, well, the rupee is down, what, 5%, 6% this year? And for fresh and positioning is very low in India. So foreign investors who come in now, you basically are getting a 5% discount. You're getting a 5% advantage for fresh money, which starts to come in now. So that's the other way to look at things. But we'll see. It's a chicken and egg. I mean, most other markets around the region in Asia are getting foreign portfolio flows into equities. India is not, and I think that's the other reason why you've got the rupee weakness, which has been more pronounced. We'll talk more about this as we kind of go forward. I'll just close out with the levels here. So the Nifty held the 38% retracement level on a closing basis at least. We need to close above the 20-hourly average. By the way, the 20-hourly is above the 40-hourly exponential average. And that level is 25,247. We need a closing above it to say that, well, this recent pause is over, and maybe we kind of sort of continue the near-term to slightly medium-term trend, which has been, of course, this pullback from the lows of 24,400. Support is yesterday's low, 25,084. Is that number. Nifty Bank closed in the positive region yesterday, positive territory yesterday. Resistance here, 55,835 and 56,156, very, very near-term levels. And of course, for the support for the Nifty Bank, that stands at 55,159, which is the low. So those are levels. GIFT Nifty will give you a quick sense of how we're likely to start. We'll pick it up from there. 60 points lower once again. What are the F&O stats looking like? Nigel has walked across with exactly that. Nigel, good morning.
Well, morning, Prashant. One of the factors that have been plaguing the markets in the last couple of trading sessions is institutions have turned net sellers. So if you look at the FI net sell number, that's overpowering what the DIs are putting in. So institutions, they mildly net sellers close on 8 to around 900 crores or thereabouts. Moving to what the FIs did in the future space, not too much. 1,000 contracts were added on the long side, 1,000 contracts were covered on the short side. They still continue to remain net short with 86% of their positions on the short side. And in absolute terms, it's around 1.4 lakh contracts on the short side. What about the FI action in stock futures? Well, the previous trading session, they added quite a few shorts. In yesterday's trading session, in fact, they added more longs than shorts. In fact, they added 2 longs for every 1 short position. Some part of that as well could be an arbitrage that's taking place out there. So that's about the FI action. Moving to the options data. Remember, yesterday you had the weekly expiry that played out as well. So that added an element of volatility, particularly in the second half of trade. We were down 100 points and then we recovered considerably as well and ended mildly in the red. So the two strikes, the bulls and the bears will feel that they have an equal say in the range for the market, because the 25,300 call, 17 lakh shares getting added there. 25,200 put as well, 17 lakh shares getting added out there. And the premiums in the vicinity of around 100 rupees or thereabouts. So it appears in the near term, we're in this range that we're looking at. So on the downside, yesterday's low, which is at around 25,085 and 25,050. That's the important mark you want to, don't want this to break on the downside. While resistance, the recent highs at around 25,331. And going by the options data, that's the mark that you're looking at in terms of a resistance mark. So for the time being, we're in a bit of a range as we speak. The Nifty Bank, that's been holding one end up. Even in yesterday's trading session, it did well. Good recovery is what we saw from the lows of the day, and it ended at around the 50 DMA. So that's the important mark you're looking at in terms of the Nifty Bank. It needs to continue its good form and lead the way from here on. Besides the index, we could see some bit of consolidation. What I would like to see is the breadth of the market improving, because the number of stocks advancing yesterday were way more than the number of stocks declining. So today, even if the index does see some sort of a consolidation, though I think that if it's a 70, 80 point downtick, at some point of time, we could see a good recovery intraday on the Nifty. But the breadth of the market as well should improve. That's what makes portfolios feel quite good. And just one stock, yesterday, GMDC, the stock did see a big move in trade. The volumes are very, very massive. But in terms of delivery percentage, it was less than 10%. So just keep an eye out on this name. Sometimes you see these moves on the street starts factoring in opportunities they believe for the next 4 to 5 years. But in the near term, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it. Delivery relatively lower in comparison to what you have seen. So keep an eye out on this one.
Okay, all right. So those are the top cues from the F&O space as well. Markets across Asia, by the way, they are a little mixed, because markets are, passing over the comments that the Fed chair made yesterday with respect to asset prices, where he was responding to a question and he went on to say that, yes, at least in the US, and I'm quoting exactly, he says that equity prices are fairly highly valued. And he was responding to a query whether the Fed is looking at the way stock prices have run up, and that was the context. So anyway, we've got a mixed picture across Asia. Japan is seeing some profit-taking. Markets like Taiwan, Hong Kong, they're still on the higher side. Taiwan's actually, slipped now, but the Hang Seng is still holding on to some gains. Let's just pull up the GIFT Nifty and the implied open. So after taking a bit of a pause over the last 2 days, we're bracing for another 60-70 point start on the downside. With that, let's get to quickly the equity call of the morning. Herald Vanderlind of HSBC says that Asian markets are up an average of 20% in 2025 so far, despite strong selling by foreign funds. He says this is due to the support from domestic retail investors, especially those in mainland China, sitting on piles of cash. He says India now appears attractive on a regional basis, and they move to an overweight stance from neutral. So HSBC turning positive on India.